This is the disappearance of Joshua Maddux. Now, this is what you would consider an unsolved case, even though officially it is solved, but just not in a way that very many people are satisfied with. So, this disappearance took place on May 8th, 2008, and at the time, Josh was 18 years old. Now, let's give you a little background. Joshua Maddux was born on March 9th, 1990, and he grew up in a town called Woodland Park, Colorado. He had two parents and two older sisters and one older brother. Joshua's older brother, his name was Zachary. He had severe depression, and tragically, he took his own life when he was 18. That was in 2006, 2 years prior to Joshua's disappearance, but let me not get ahead of myself. So, Josh's parents were divorced, and Josh lived with his father and two sisters. I would love to know more about that. I don't know if it would be pertinent or not, but just, the more information we could have, the better. But I don't know why they divorced or why the kids were living with the father. Because as you know, that is kind of not the norm. Not saying that, fathers aren't perfectly capable, but just, the norm is that the kids live with the mother. So, Josh was basically a happy guy. He was very into music, writing. He did well in school. He had good grades. He had a lot of friends. He was an outdoorsy type of guy. He was said to be carefree. He stayed out of trouble. And he was very into playing his guitar. Now, when his brother died in 2006, Josh was devastated, as of course anyone would be in his position, but not any more than would be expected. You know what I mean? I mean, he was, coping sufficiently. There was nothing strange going on that anyone noted. He wasn't depressed. He was carrying on as well as he could. So on May 8th, 2008, Josh left his house and he told his sister he was going out to walk. And he never came back. So, when they first realized he wasn't home at the end of the day, I guess they kind of figured, let's wait and see what happens. He's 18. They had has been dismissed by the police, or just not looked into. So, I mean, there isn't any more to this case. But, what do you think? Let's take a look at the different possibilities. So, one possibility is that he was so depressed, and so upset over the loss of his brother, even though people were saying he was a happy guy, carefree, whatever, but let's say maybe nobody noticed, He was depressed, and he figured he was going to do the same thing that his brother Zachary had done. It sure doesn't seem like this would be the way anyone would do it. I mean, no way. No. Doesn't make any sense for that to be it. That's why that was never really a thing, I don't think. You're not gonna jump headfirst into a chimney and just get stuck there for who knows how long. No. So let's move on. Was it an accident? I mean, that's what the police are going with, or the coroner. How in the world could that possibly be? How? I don't get it. If he had his clothes on, maybe, it is possible. If he had his clothes on and he had not already been inside the cabin, then maybe, he was exploring. He wanted to get into this cabin to see what's inside, and he couldn't get in the front door, and he was curious, and somehow, he took off the rebar, let's say, and somehow wound up just getting stuck. Like that, could conceivably happen, I suppose. But it doesn't make sense because he wasn't dressed. He had a shirt on. How would that work, And he had already been in the inside. So why would he need to come back, go inside, take off his clothes, go back outside, climb up, and try to get in the chimney? No way. That's the main problem there. The fact that his clothes are inside the house throws away the possibility of it being an accident because he was trying to break in to the cabin. Like, if I'm missing something here, please let me know, If you have an understanding of how it makes sense, I would love to hear it. Seriously. Any theories, Let's have a friendly conversation about this. But I can't understand how. Like I'm saying, I understand it's possible somehow that he, did it himself.